Let me start with something you'd never expect me to admit. If I could rewind the tape of my life, I wouldn't ask for more brilliance, or more luck, or more favorable markets. I'd ask for fewer unforced errors. And here's the part that stings. You're committing the same errors right now. Not in some distant, theoretical, someday way. No, you're doing it this very minute in your habits, your assumptions, and your refusal to confront the arithmetic of time. People like to pretend life is long, that they can course correct later, that another decade will come along where they'll finally get serious. Well, let me give you the harshest gift I can offer. You don't have many decades left to waste. Not if you want compounding to work in your favor, instead of mocking you. I see people your age, smart people, still swinging for fences as if they're 25, still mistaking excitement for opportunity, still confusing motion with progress, still trying to outrun the consequences of a lifetime spent ignoring basic reality. And here's the twist that contradicts all the self-help nonsense you've been fed. You don't need more upside. You need fewer disasters. At your age, survival is the winning strategy. Everything else is ego talking. But if you're willing to drop that ego even briefly, the principles I am about to give you can save entire decades of your life. They've certainly saved mine. Let's begin. I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it until you finally let it sink in. Compounding is not your friend when you're stupid. It magnifies returns, sure, but it also magnifies your blunders. And most people, especially after 50, don't blow up because they lacked intelligence. They blow up because they insisted on acting like the laws of arithmetic would give them a personal exemption. I learned early that compounding cuts both ways. Gains compound, mistakes compound. And the older you get, the faster the negative compounding eats your future. When you're 25, a dumb decision sets you back a year or two. When you're 55, a dumb decision can quietly vaporize the next 20. People like to talk about making up for lost time in midlife. I call that fantasy accounting. Let me tell you an unpleasant truth most people never hear because they're too busy listening to flattery. By your 50s, most of your big career moves are over. Your risk tolerance is shrinking like a puddle in the sun. Your ability to regenerate lost capital is fading, and the world is no longer structured to give you fresh starts. It's structured to expose the weaknesses you never fixed. In other words, the game changes. But most people don't. When I was a boy during the Great Depression, I saw what real risk looks like. I saw fathers staring at empty tables. I saw educated men selling apples on street corners. I saw people lose everything because they believed good times were permanent or that borrowing was harmless. Human nature hasn't evolved since then. Not 1 inch. People today make the same errors, just with shinier toys. Different decade, same stupidity. The middle-aged investor chases crypto because his coworker doubled his money. The late career executive takes on leverage because he's behind his peers. The retiree buys some complicated nonsense he can't possibly understand because the salesman used the words guaranteed and exclusive. It's the same story, only now the stakes are higher because they don't have 40 years ahead of them to heal from their own foolishness. After 50, you don't get the luxury of reckless optimism. You need durability. You need staying power. You need to avoid the handful of decisions that can sink you permanently. I've always said that avoiding stupidity is a full-time job, and I meant it. Let me tell you a story. I once knew a man, bright fellow, prestigious degrees, high-status job, the whole peacock routine. At 55, he decided he was behind. Behind whom? Nobody knows. Envy rarely uses a measuring stick that makes any sense, so he dumped a pile of money into .com startups. He didn't understand them. He didn't even pretend to. He just didn't want to be the only guy at his golf club who wasn't bragging about some 10-bagger stock. By 2002, the market taught him a lesson about gravity. He lost more than half. I ran into him decades later. He hadn't recovered, and not just financially. His confidence never returned. He talked endlessly about what he almost had. The graveyard is full of men who almost had something. If Head simply bought a basket of reliable businesses, the kind you'd barely notice on a stock chart, Head have been fine. Not glamorous. Not exciting. But fine. When you're older, fine is another word for financially free. People forget. At 50, the goal isn't brilliance. It's not dying broke. You want a formula for stupidity? It goes like this. Short timeline plus big envy plus shrinking margin for error equals disaster. You can survive all sorts of foolishness when you're young because the clock is generous. But at 50, the clock turns predatory. Lose half your money at 30, you can recover in a decade. Lose half at 60, you might spend the rest of your life rearranging the wreckage. And don't tell me that's depressing. It's reality. Ignoring reality is how people end up working through retirement or eating canned soup while complaining about bad luck. You don't need genius at this age. You need discipline. You don't need heroic bets. You need to avoid tragic ones. You don't need to swing harder. You need to stop swinging at garbage pitches thrown by fast-talking idiots. One of the biggest myths in finance is that older investors should be chasing a final act, some dramatic, last-minute catch-up play that magically transforms a lifetime of mediocre decisions. I consider that one of the more dangerous delusions society encourages. Let me be as clear as I can. Midlife is not the time for heroics. It's the time for competence. The boring investor wins at this stage. The quiet saver wins. The patient holder wins. The person who ignores CNBC and focuses on cash flow wins. Everyone else becomes an anecdote. Let me give you another example. Warren and I once looked like complete idiots during the tech boom. Kids half our age were minting fortunes overnight. We were sitting there owning insurance companies, candy shops, furniture stores, newspapers, the kind of businesses that produce steady returns and zero applause. We were dinosaurs, they said. Out of touch. Too conservative. Then the bubble burst. Our boring companies kept printing money. Their exciting ones disappeared like smoke. Human nature makes the same mistake over and over. It confuses speed with intelligence. It confuses novelty with value. It confuses bragging rights with wealth. The people who laughed at our boring portfolio were broke. We were still rich. And as far as I can tell, being quietly rich beats being loudly broke. Now, let's talk about envy, the kind of envy that destroys midlife investors faster than any recession ever could. Envy is the only sin that gives you no pleasure. Gluttony comes with a good meal. Lust comes with at least a moment of excitement. Greed buys you things. But envy gives you nothing but misery and stupid decisions. People don't go broke because they can't earn. They go broke because they can't stand seeing someone else earn more. I once watched a man with a perfectly sensible portfolio throw it all away because his golf buddies struck gold in oil stocks. He couldn't tolerate being the small-timer, so he levered up and chased the same bets. Oil collapsed. So did he. His friends lost money too, but they still had careers. He had retirement to worry about. At over 50, envy becomes lethal. Why? Because you don't have enough time left to rebuild from your own stupidity. One envious impulse can nuke decades of patience. The best investors I've ever known, the truly durable ones, had almost zero interest in what others were doing. They didn't envy. They didn't mimic. They didn't need to feel superior. They just compounded quietly. That's the temperament that wins in the long run. Now let me turn the lens on myself. I don't enjoy talking about my mistakes, but they're more useful to you than my successes. Decades ago, I bought a business that turned out to be far better than I realized. I made a tidy profit, congratulated myself, and moved on. If it held it, my net worth would have doubled. I wasn't wrong about the investment. I was wrong about my own behavior. That's the part most people never understand. You can pick a great business and still lose if you lack the discipline to hold it. People love selling winners too soon. They love locking in gains. It feels prudent. It feels safe. It feels smart. But selling a great business early is just a polite way of robbing your future self. Compounding punishes impatience brutally. Even small miscalculations, stretched across decades, become financial amputations. I eventually learned my lesson. When you find a great business, one that will still matter in 20 years, you sit on your behind and hold it. You don't get clever. You don't get itchy fingers. You don't let headlines jolt you into stupidity. The world is constantly screaming at you to act, but wealth quietly whispers, wait. At 50 and beyond, waiting is your strongest weapon and your hardest task. The older you get, the more the market tempts you into cleverness. It whispers, you're experienced now. You see patterns others miss. It's time to make a sophisticated move. No, it isn't. Sophistication is usually just ego in a tuxedo, and ego is the silent assassin of late life portfolios. At 25, you can afford ego. At 55, ego will drag you into a pit and hand you a shovel. I've watched this dance for nearly a century. A middle-aged investor reads a newsletter claiming that some new disruptor is about to destroy every boring business in the world. He panics. He sells the reliable stocks that have carried him through 3 recessions. He dumps Johnson & Johnson. He dumps Coca-Cola. He dumps the very companies that paid his bills when times were tough. Then he chases a shiny new IPO run by a 27-year-old CEO who looks like he still lives on energy drinks. And when the whole thing collapses, he stands there, staring at his shriveled account, asking himself how he lost a lifetime of stability chasing something he didn't even understand. Let me tell you why these disasters happen. It's not greed. It's not stupidity. It's the human aversion to boredom. People underestimate how destructive boredom is. They think risk comes from volatility or recessions. No, risk comes from the inability to sit still while compounding does its quiet work. If you insist on entertainment, go to the movies. If you insist on adrenaline, jump out of an airplane. But if you insist on excitement from your portfolio, you're done. The market doesn't reward excitement. It punishes it. Boring businesses survive. Boring habits accumulate. Boring portfolios let you sleep at night. There's a paradox most investors never grasp. The less thrilling your investments are after 50, the more thrilling your retirement will be. Everyone wants to be rich. Few want to be bored. But boredom is the price of compounding. And compounding is the closest thing we have to financial magic. Now, let's revisit something people chronically misunderstand. Your margin for error shrinks every year after 50. When you're young, the market is a forgiving teacher. When you're older, it becomes a strict accountant. It doesn't care about your hopes, your pride, or your late life ambitions to catch up. It cares about arithmetic, and arithmetic is merciless. Lose 50% at 30, you can rebuild it. Lose 50% at 60, and you'll probably spend the rest of your life adjusting expectations, which is a polite way of saying you'll be working longer, traveling less, and worrying more. At some point, and I promise this moment comes for everyone, you realize your remaining decades are more valuable than any potential gain. That's when you finally see the wisdom in caution. People mock caution in their 20 seconds. They respect it in their 60 seconds. And they desperately wish for it in their 70 seconds. Let me shift the focus to something even more dangerous than bad decisions. The illusion of knowledge. One of the worst traits people develop with age is the belief that their opinions automatically become wiser simply because they've been alive longer. That's nonsense. I've watched 60-year-olds make decisions that would embarrass a teenager. Age doesn't guarantee wisdom. It only guarantees you've avoided dying so far. Experience doesn't protect you from stupidity. It simply gives you more opportunities to express it. Most people think they need opinions about everything: interest rates, tech stocks, oil prices, currency movements, the GDP of countries they couldn't find on a map. They talk as if knowledge grows automatically with birthdays. No, real knowledge is scarce. Real humility is even scarcer. And admitting "I don't know," especially after 50, is practically a superpower. Let me tell you a story about a lawyer in Los Angeles. Sharp fellow, good income, great reputation. He decided with astonishing confidence that he understood currency markets better than the people who spent their entire lives studying them. He read a few articles, glanced at some charts, and concluded the yen was destined to collapse. He bet big, very big. The yen did what currencies often do. It embarrassed the man predicting it. He lost most of his retirement savings. His mistake wasn't the bet. His mistake was the arrogance behind it, the belief that a little information plus a little confidence added up to expertise. It didn't. In fact, that combination, a teaspoon of knowledge mixed with a gallon of ego, is the most toxic cocktail in finance. If Head simply admitted, "I don't know," Head be fine today. Most people would rather be wrong loudly than right quietly. At 50 and beyond, that attitude is suicidal. This is one reason Berkshire worked so well. Warren and I didn't pretend to understand everything. We didn't try to. We ignored thousands of opportunities simply because we lacked the expertise. We knew our circle of competence and stayed inside it. That discipline saved us from disasters that ruined smarter, louder people. You don't get rich by knowing everything. You get rich by knowing what you don't know and avoiding it. In the later years of life, the temptation to act omniscient becomes overwhelming. You've collected decades of stories, lessons, victories, and scars. You begin to think you've seen it all. But the world has an endless supply of new ways to humiliate overconfident men. Confidence feels good. Accuracy matters more. And the most accurate investors I've known had a quiet, steady refrain running through their mind: "I might be wrong." That simple thought protects you from calamity. Let me turn now to a topic people rarely discuss honestly: the difference between thinking like an employee and thinking like an owner. This distinction is more important after 50 than at any other point in life. Employees chase titles, promotions, recognition, and the approval of people who might not even remember their names 5 years later. They optimize for optics. They polish resumes. They play games. Owners optimize for survival, for cash flow, for independence, for durability. Owners think decades ahead. Employees think quarters ahead. This distinction has nothing to do with job titles. I've known CEOs who were employees at heart, glorified bureaucrats, terrified of losing the next political battle. And I've known janitors who quietly bought rental properties and built small fortunes. Thinking like an owner is a mindset, one rooted in autonomy and leverage. But here's the tragedy. Most people remain careerists their entire lives. They keep earning well, they keep spending well. But they never accumulate anything that works when they're asleep. You want a frightening thought? If you're over 50 and you still don't own anything that produces income without your effort, you're one health scare away from financial disaster. People underestimate how fragile a high salary is. Salary is a treadmill. Ownership is an engine. If you drop dead, ownership keeps paying your family. Salary stops at your last breath. I practiced law early in my career. I worked with brilliant attorneys, truly first-rate minds. But many of them spent their entire lives trading hours for dollars. They made huge incomes, but nothing compounded for them. The day they retired, the income vanished. Some of them ended up struggling in old age, not because they were dumb, but because they optimized for the wrong game. I realized early that I didn't want that future. Neither did Warren. We wanted ownership. We wanted assets that made money, whether we were golfing, sleeping, or dead. That single mental shift is worth more than all the financial tricks, stock tips, and forecasting models combined. At 50 and beyond, thinking like an owner isn't optional. It's mandatory. Your time becomes more precious. Your energy becomes more limited. Your days become more valuable. You cannot spend the final decades of your life trapped in a cycle designed for ambitious 28-year-olds. You must break out of the careerism trap, and the only exit is ownership. Now let me tell you something uncomfortable. If you're over 50 and still living paycheck to paycheck, no matter how high that paycheck, you need to face a difficult truth. You haven't been playing the wealth game. You've been playing the status game. You've optimized for appearances instead of autonomy, for lifestyle instead of leverage, for the illusion of success instead of the mathematics of it. But here's the good news. You can still change. You simply won't get infinite tries. Shift your identity from consumer to owner, from spender to accumulator, from careerist to capitalist. Stop caring about what colleagues think. Stop caring about titles. Stop caring about office politics. Buy ownership. Keep ownership. Let ownership compound until it grows into independence. Nobody applauds you when you buy Procter & Gamble, but dividends don't care about applause. 20 years from now, those dividends will matter far more than your old job titles. Careerism fades. Ownership endures. Let's move to something foundational, something shaped by the hardest years of my childhood. I lived through the Great Depression, not the cartoon version people imagine when they look at black and white photos. The real thing. Banks failed. Families starved. People survived on a combination of grit and luck. The stock market fell nearly 90%. That's not volatility, that's annihilation. I saw men lose their homes. I saw families pile into a single apartment because rent was impossible. I saw the kind of desperation that permanently rewires your relationship with risk. You don't forget the sight of grown adults lining up for bread. You don't forget the humiliation in their eyes. That era taught me the most important financial truth of my life. Good times are not the default setting. Civilizations rise and fall. Markets boom and crash. Prosperity is temporary. Reality eventually reclaims the delusional. This is why I fear debt. This is why I despise leverage. This is why I obsess over durability. People today think a 10% correction is painful. Try surviving 1,932. Once you understand how vicious the world can be during a true collapse, you learn to structure your financial life so you never need perfect conditions to survive. That's resilience. And resilience beats brilliance every single time. Small, boring businesses survived the Depression. The flashy ones didn't. The people who lived modestly survived. The reckless didn't. The families who avoided debt survived. The ones who used leverage suffered tragedies they never recovered from. Durability, not genius, separates survivors from casualties. So when you're over 50, you must build your financial life like it's designed to withstand a catastrophe. Because if a catastrophe comes, you won't have time to rebuild. If you make one major mistake, that's it. You're out of the game. That's why I tell people over 50, your job isn't to predict the next recession. Your job is to ensure a recession can't ruin you. We've now arrived at the part of the conversation where most people look for a secret formula, some clever tactic I pulled out of a hat, but I hate to disappoint you. My so-called wisdom is 90% subtraction. I avoided debt, I avoided drama, and I avoided dumb people. That's it. No mystical brilliance, just defensive living. Most people complicate their lives into oblivion. I simplified mine. And at my age, I can tell you with certainty, subtraction is a more reliable engine of wealth and sanity than addition. Debt was my first sworn enemy. I saw what leverage did to families during the Depression. People borrowed against their homes because times were good and payments seemed manageable. Then reality shifted, as it always does, and debt crushed them like insects. Watching a man lose his home will change you forever. Borrowed money has a way of flipping the world upside down. Good times look stable until the moment they're not. A little leverage looks harmless until the moment it detonates. People forget that debt doesn't just increase returns, it increases fragility. With no debt, you can survive volatility. With debt, volatility becomes fatal. Warren and I built Berkshire with this philosophy baked in. We avoided leverage like a contagious disease. Sure, we could have juiced returns with borrowed money. Everyone around us was doing it. But we weren't interested in looking brilliant for 5 years if it meant risking humiliation in year 6. People think discipline is about doing extraordinary things. It's actually about refusing to do stupid ones. The second thing I avoided was drama. Drama is a parasite. It consumes your mental bandwidth, sabotages your judgment, and drags you into battles that have no financial or emotional payoff. I've seen more men ruin themselves through drama than through bad investments. A messy divorce, a toxic partner, a destructive friendship, a feud that spirals into scorched earth insanity, these things have cost people fortunes. Not because they were dumb investors, but because their personal chaos infected their financial decisions. Drama is expensive. Rationality is cheap. The older you get, the more valuable peace becomes. I made it a strict rule. I don't fight unnecessary battles. I don't engage with unstable people. I don't let chaos into my house, my partnerships, or my head. This isn't softness. It's survival. Most people underestimate the cost of emotional turbulence. They think money is lost in markets. More often, money is lost in the throes of personal dysfunction. When you're over 50, drama can set you back years you no longer have. The third thing I avoided was dumb people. And by dumb, I don't mean people with low IQ. I mean people with low character, dishonest people, unreliable people, reckless people, shortcut people. They're radioactive. Their stupidity spreads like a virus. You spend enough time around a fool, you eventually become collateral damage. Or worse, you become a fool yourself. Early in my career, I watched colleagues, brilliant ones, fall for fast-talking operators who pitched them shiny, complicated deals. These con artists always had the same traits: a charismatic grin, vague promises, slick language, and a timeline that required quick decisions. Quick decisions are the friend of liars and the enemy of rational people. Every disaster in finance begins with the sentence, "I trusted the wrong person." You want to protect your wealth after 50. Start by protecting your circle. If someone consistently creates problems, drama, confusion, or instability, remove them from your financial life with surgical precision. Your success will be determined far more by who you avoid than who you partner with. Now, speaking of partnerships, let me clear up a myth people love to spread about Warren and me. They imagine us sitting in some golden tower playing four-dimensional chess with billions. They assume we were always in perfect agreement, always brilliant, always synchronized. Nonsense. We were compatible, not magical. We trusted each other completely. In business, that's rarer than diamonds. There was no backstabbing, no political maneuvering, no passive-aggressive nonsense. We didn't waste energy managing egos. We had enormous efficiency simply because we didn't have to defend ourselves from each other. Most organizations waste half their resources on internal conflict. We wasted none. Another thing that worked is that our skills complemented each other. Warren had an uncanny ability to find undervalued businesses, companies that were temporarily ignored but fundamentally sound. My role was often to steer us away from cigar butt investing, those cheap, dying businesses where you get a few puffs of profit before they collapse. Buying wonderful businesses at fair prices produced billions for us. But that shift required patience, discipline, and the humility to evolve. Partnerships work when both people can challenge each other without descending into emotional chaos. Warren and I did that well. But let me be clear, not everything worked. We made mistakes. We backed managers who turned out to be incompetent or dishonest. And let me tell you something. There is no investment loss quite as painful as trusting the wrong person. When a manager lies, the numbers lie. When the numbers lie, your judgment lies. By the time you figure it out, the damage is terminal. Another thing that didn't work was trying to fix businesses with rotten cultures. You can change a process. You can change a product. You can even change a CEO. But a deeply broken culture? That's almost impossible. We learned that the hard way. I've said it many times. Show me the incentives, and it'll show you the behavior. If the incentives reward nonsense, no amount of pep talks will save the business. We also missed opportunities, massive ones. Tech companies in the early days, for example. People assume Berkshire grabbed everything worth owning. Not true. But missing opportunities never kept me awake at night. Chasing the wrong ones would have. I'd rather regret omission than commission. That's a philosophy every investor over 50 should memorize. Now, let's return to where you fit into all this. Most people over 50 don't need brilliance. They need protection. They need insulation from terminal mistakes. And the way you insulate yourself is by embracing a mindset most people resist with every fiber of their ego. Defense wins games, not offense, not risk, not cleverness, not speed. Defense. At your age, survival is the real strategy. If you stay solvent long enough, compounding will take care of the rest. I once knew a doctor, steady income, modest lifestyle, disciplined habits. At 55, he started funneling his savings into high-quality dividend stocks. Nothing flashy, nothing exciting, just boring, reliable cash flow machines. He reinvested dividends. He ignored financial gossip. He lived well below his means. By 70, he was financially free, not flamboyantly rich, but unshakably secure. That's the goal after 50. Not glamour, not envy, not chest thumping. Security. Compare that with another fellow I knew, an entrepreneur. Very sharp, very ambitious. At 52, he believed he was falling behind. So he went all in on speculative real estate projects, loaded with leverage and promises of extraordinary returns. When the market shifted, he was bankrupt by 57. Same age, similar intellect, different philosophies. One played defense, the other chased offense. Defense won. It always does in the later innings of life. This is the part nobody wants to hear. After 50, you don't have to be spectacular. You just have to be solvent. You don't need 100% gains. You need to avoid 50% losses. You don't need moonshots. You need stable ground. You don't need excitement. You need endurance. If you want to get richer or stay rich after 50, follow the simplest rules in the world. Keep things simple. Own businesses you truly understand. Avoid leverage. Ignore fads. Avoid envy. Protect capital. Play defense. A steady 7% return compounded for 15 years is a miracle. It doubles, then doubles again. People underestimate how powerful quiet compounding becomes when you simply stop sabotaging yourself. The tragedy is that most people never experience this miracle because they constantly interrupt it with panic, with boredom, with ego, with envy, with stupid impulses. Compounding is like a snowball. It grows only as long as you don't drop it. Now let's discuss the most painful but useful topic: overspending. The arithmetic of personal finance has no sympathy. If you spend more than you earn, you lose. If you live beyond your means, you lose. If you refuse to delay gratification, you lose. People desperately want this truth to be negotiable. It isn't. I've watched high-income earners live like kings in their 40 seconds and like anxious peasants in their 70 seconds, simply because they couldn't control their spending. Meanwhile, I've seen modest earners, janitors, teachers, librarians die wealthy because they lived simply and invested consistently. The gap wasn't intelligence. It wasn't opportunity. It wasn't luck. It was behavior. Overspending is the great killer of financial dreams. You can't save people from it, not even with good advice. They have to save themselves from their own impulses. And after 50, those impulses become catastrophic. You don't get to reboot your finances every decade. You're now in the phase of life where every mistake echoes louder. Spending less than you earn is the closest thing to a universal law in finance. Break it, and nothing will save you, not the market, not cleverness, not luck, not Warren Buffett, not me. People ask me all the time, Charlie, what's the best investment at my age? My answer is simple. Stop buying crap you don't need. That advice alone would prevent half the financial misery in the world. At over 50, dignity is the real prize. Not the fancy car, not the prestigious neighborhood, not the bragging rights. Dignity, independence, knowing your final years won't involve begging your children for help or working until you drop dead. And that doesn't come from chasing extraordinary returns. It comes from restraint. Let me close this section with the final brutal truth. The world does not reward brilliance nearly as much as it rewards avoiding stupidity. And nothing, absolutely nothing, is more stupid than spending your way into misery. Your future self is watching. Your family is watching. Reality is watching. You can still win the game, but only if you stop handing out points to the enemy. There's one last point I want to press into your mind while you're still listening, because most people tune out right before the punchline. Everything I've told you comes down to one central idea. Your life after 50 is determined far more by what you refuse to do than by what you chase. People love to fantasize about winning big. They daydream about enormous returns, miraculous opportunities, perfectly timed bets. But they rarely imagine the opposite, the consequences of one catastrophic decision. At your age, one mistake can overshadow 20 correct moves. One gamble can erase decades of prudence. One burst of envy, one indulgence in drama, one misplaced trust, and suddenly the whole structure you spent a lifetime building starts to wobble. People underestimate fragility because they've gone too many years without facing true ruin. They treat prosperity as a guarantee instead of a privilege. But I lived through a collapse that reset an entire generation. I saw firsthand what happens when people assume stability is permanent. The world is full of people who believed they had plenty of time until the moment they didn't. So here's the instruction I want etched into your brain. Make your life unbreakable. Not perfect, not flashy, not impressive. Unbreakable. That means building a financial structure that survives recessions, market crashes, medical emergencies, job losses, foolish relatives, dishonest acquaintances, and your own occasional lapses in judgment. You don't need brilliance for that. You need humility. Humility to live below your means. Humility to avoid leverage. Humility to ignore the financial circus on television. Humility to stay in your circle of competence. Humility to let other people appear richer than you without letting envy drag you into their stupidity. Humility is not self-loathing. It's self-protection. It's the recognition that the world is too unpredictable and your life too finite to be throwing Hail Mary passes in the fourth quarter. The truly wealthy old people I've met, the ones who were still calm, still generous, still independent, all shared the same traits. They were sober thinkers. They were long-term planners. They were immune to the hysteria of the crowd. They avoided people who created chaos. They invested in simplicity. They let compounding do the lifting instead of ego. Their wealth came not from heroics but from consistency, not from brilliance but from temperament, not from speculation but from patience. And patience is something you can still cultivate even now. Patience with your money, patience with your expectations, patience with your timeline, patience with the slow, steady march of compounding. You can't reverse time, but you can harness it more intelligently. That's the real advantage of being over 50. You finally understand the difference between excitement and fulfillment, between noise and signal, between financial theater and financial freedom. You've lived long enough to recognize nonsense. Now have the discipline to avoid it. Let me leave you with the simplest, most reliable philosophy I've built my life on. The world rewards the few people who aren't trying to be clever. It quietly crowns those who avoid stupidity. It enriches the disciplined and destroys the impulsive. If you want dignity in old age, if you want independence, if you want to sleep soundly while others panic, then adopt the only strategy that has never failed me. Spend less than you earn. Own durable assets. Hold them for a long time. Avoid debt. Avoid drama. Avoid dumb people. Let compounding work. And for God's sake, don't try to impress anyone. You don't win the game by being brilliant. You win it by not self-destructing. If you take nothing else from this long lecture, take that. The difference between a bitter old age and a peaceful one is just a handful of avoided mistakes. Everything else is noise.